All right, so today we're doing something a little different. We're not just going to talk about what happened in ancient Indian history. Instead, we're going to investigate how we even know what happened. Think of it like a massive detective story. We're opening up the historian's toolkit to see how they piece together a narrative from clues that are literally thousands of years old. So, yeah, how do you build a story from thousands of years of silence? That's the big question, right? For a huge chunk of its early history, the Indian subcontinent left behind very, very few written records that we can actually read today. So you're left with this huge blank space. How in the world do you fill that in? How do you create a story out of what seems like just nothing? It's a really fascinating puzzle. Well, the answer is you become a detective. You have to. You look for clues, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. I mean, every single object, every coin, every carved stone like this one, it's a piece of a gigantic puzzle. The job is to find these pieces, figure out what they mean, and then try to fit them together. So let's start with the clues that were designed to last forever, messages carved right into solid rock. All right, so this is the puzzle of the past. To solve it, we're going to need the right tools. So let's break down the kinds of evidence historians get their hands on to figure all this stuff out. And it basically boils down to two main types of evidence. You've got what was buried, and you've got what was written. The first is archaeological evidence. That's the physical stuff, the things people left behind. Could be huge cities, could be tiny little beads. And then you have the literary evidence, the stories, the laws, the accounts they actually wrote down. Each one gives us a totally different angle, a completely different window into their world. Okay, let's dive into our detective toolkit. First up, clues buried in the earth. This is the archaeological evidence, the stuff you can actually touch and hold. Sometimes the earliest clues are the most powerful. Take these Paleolithic stone tools. I mean, they look super simple, right? But what they represent is just wow. They tell a story of sheer survival, of early humans hunting, cutting, scraping, just doing whatever they could to make it to the next day. These simple stones mark this huge, incredible journey from just gathering food to actually producing it. And look, archaeology isn't just about finding small tools. Oh no. Sometimes you find entire cities. The discovery of places like Mohenjo-Daro and the Indus Valley was a total game changer. I mean, all of a sudden, we had proof of incredibly advanced city planning with complex drainage systems and huge public buildings. And this was all happening thousands of years ago, way before most of the written history we have. So you might be wondering, okay, that's great, but how do we know how old any of this stuff is? Well, this is where science gives our historical detective work a massive power-up. It's a technique called carbon-14 dating. Basically, it lets us put a timestamp on anything that was once alive. It's because of this that we know, for example, that people were farming in places like Kashmir and Rajasthan as far back as 6000 BC. This isn't just a guess, it's a proper forensic process. All right, let's move on to our next set of clues. We've looked at buried stuff. Now let's talk about messages in stone and metal. These are humanity's first real attempts to record information so it would last forever. And of course, historians have fancy names for these fields. First, there's epigraphy. That's just the study of inscriptions, things carved on stone pillars, seals, or copper plates. Then you've got numismatics, which is the study of coins. And trust me, you would be absolutely amazed what these tiny little pieces of metal can reveal. And this was a huge moment, a massive breakthrough. For centuries, ancient scripts like Brahmi were just a mystery. Nobody could read them. The past was literally silent. Then, in 1837, this one guy, James Prinsep, he cracks the code. This was the Indian equivalent of finding the Rosetta Stone. All of a sudden, the words of Emperor Ashoka could be read. An entire empire, lost to time, suddenly had a voice again. And what about coins? Oh, they're like tiny, data-packed historical documents. I mean, just think about it. The metal they're made from tells you about the economy. The symbols tell you about the gods they worshipped. Where you find them tells you how far an empire stretched. The very first Indian coins were pretty simple, just silver pieces with marks punched into them. But then you get to the Guptas, and they issued a staggering number of gold coins. I mean, what does that tell you? It screams prosperity, right? Okay, let's open up a couple of case files to see how this works on the real world. Check out the Junagadh inscription. This thing is amazing. It's not just some royal brag sheet, it's a public works record. It tells us that the Mauryan Empire actually built a dam. I mean, think about that. A single carving in a rock gives us hard evidence of a massive, state-sponsored infrastructure project from over 2,000 years ago. It's those kinds of details that just make history pop. Okay, so we've looked at things that were buried and things that were carved. Now let's turn to the things that were written. This is where we get something that objects can't always give us. We get the stories, the ideas, the beliefs. We start to understand the why behind the what. And we can pretty much split these writings into two big piles. On one hand, you have religious literature. We're talking about the Vedas, the Puranas, Buddhist and Jaina texts. These give us a fantastic window into the culture and society. But then you've got the secular stuff, law books, biographies, even plays. And one of the most famous is Kautilya's Arthashastra, which is basically a super detailed instruction manual on how to run a government. It's like finding a policy handbook from the Mauryan Empire. Incredible. 100,000 verses. That's how long the Mahabharata is today. But here's the crazy part. It didn't start that way. Not even close. It began as a much smaller story called the Jaya Samhita, which was only about 8,800 verses long. But then, over hundreds of years, it just grew. New stories, new characters, new philosophies got woven into it until it became this absolute giant of a text. It's like the story itself grew up alongside the culture. And there's one more type of written source that is just priceless. Eyewitness accounts from outsiders. You had these foreign travelers who were like the first international correspondents. A Greek ambassador named Megasthenes wrote about the court of Chandragupta Maurya. The Chinese monk Xunzang gave us a super detailed account of India during the age of Harsha. And later, the Arab scholar al-Biruni wrote this deep dive into Indian society. Their perspective is so valuable because, they notice the little things, the stuff that local people might just see as normal and not even think to write down. Okay, so we've got all these different clues, right? Tools, ruins, inscriptions, coins, ancient texts, a whole pile of stuff. But a pile of clues isn't a story. The final and maybe the most crucial part of the job is piecing it all together to build the actual narrative. And here's how they do it. This is the historian's method in a nutshell. First, you uncover the evidence. You dig up the artifacts, the coins, the inscriptions. Then you analyze the texts. You study the literature to get the stories and the context. And then comes the most important part. You cross-reference everything. You ask questions like, okay, does this coin that mentions a king line up with a text that describes his reign? Or do the artifacts we're digging up match what this foreign traveler wrote about trade? When all these different clues start pointing in the same direction, that's when you know you're onto something solid. And this really is the key thing to remember. History is not some dusty old book of facts that's set in stone. Not at all. It's a living, breathing, ongoing investigation. Every time a new site is excavated or an old text is deciphered, our understanding can shift. It can challenge what we thought we knew and force us to redraw the map of the past. So really, the great detective story of the past is nowhere near finished. There are still so many secrets buried right under our feet or hidden away in ancient texts that are just waiting to be understood. And that leaves us with a pretty exciting question, doesn't it? What's the next big clue going to be, and what part of the story will it change forever?